Le muestro una entrevista que le hice justamente a Janet Napolitano, presidenta de la Universidad de California y exsecretaria de Seguridad Nacional de Estados Unidos. Madam President, thank you very much for this interview.
Oh, thank you.
Do you see opportunity in research and academic exchanges between Mexico and the University of California?
I think there's tremendous opportunity for research in areas like energy, in areas like health, in areas like education, mobility, things that really know no borders, and also in terms of student exchange between the University of California and universities in Mexico.
Many cities in the U.S. have decided to consider themselves sanctuaries. What is your take as president of the University of California?
You know, we haven't used the label sanctuary because no one really knows what it means, but we have said very clearly that we want to protect our undocumented students, that our own police will not participate in immigration-related actions, that we won't turn over student records, that anyone is welcome to our health centers regardless of their immigration status. We want our campuses to be a safe place for all students.
Do you think there could be any backlash from the federal government should you do this?
I certainly hope not. I think what we are doing is perfectly within the bounds of the law. And it represents what a university is, which is a welcoming community for students of all stripes and colors.
The U.S.-Mexico relationship has, it seems to have been on a downturn since this administration took office. What is your take, having been in an important cabinet position?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the relationship at the top leadership level is very tense right now. And our governments are in conflict, which is all the more reason why institutions like universities need to step forward and extend a hand of partnership, a hand of mutual respect, a hand of looking at problems that we can work on together.
What message are you taking home from Mexican universities?
That there's great eagerness to work with the University of California in so many areas, from energy research, going to issues such as energy efficiency, climate change, to health, dealing with, say, diseases that occur along the border, to students we share, the students that are U.S. citizens that are in Mexico, and those that are Mexican citizens that find themselves in the United States. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of those. So that there's great eagerness to partner together.
You were Secretary of Homeland Security. Do you think a border wall will be of any use in terms of U.S. safety?
No, I don't think a wall makes any sense. When I was the governor of Arizona, I was often quoted saying, "Show me an 11-foot wall and I'll show you a 12-foot ladder." And that's what I think about walls.
You've stated that entering illegally the U.S. to work should not be considered a crime.
No, and recognizing that, of course, we want people to immigrate legally. But that doesn't omit the fact that a number cross illegally, and then the question is, how do we treat those people? They've come here to work, they've come to the United States to work, to better their lives, their families' lives. You know, that's an immigration tradition that goes far back in our country.
What future do you think Donald Trump's executive orders have?
It's hard to say. Which executive orders are you talking about? The travel bans, or, you know, the travel bans are hung up in the courts, and I think they'll be hung up in the courts for quite a while. Some of his other executive orders, you know, unfortunately, they will be the law of the land unless and until they're reinstated.
Why do you think border security became such a big issue in the presidential campaign?
You know, I think border security became such a big issue because of the unfortunate tendency in American politics to look for scapegoats when things aren't going well. And immigrants and immigrant communities have often been scapegoats in American history. You know, 100+ years ago, it was German immigrants. Then it was the Irish and the Italians and the Chinese. All have been subjected to immigration bans of one form or another. And so that kind of tension is what, as universities, we can help pierce through by bringing people together, by talking about the future that we can build together, by showing the value added of partnership as opposed to conflict.
In the era of post-truth, how important is the message and the research that universities can deliver?
You know, universities, we develop facts, we develop evidence, and hopefully at some point we can influence public policy and the public writ large about what the real facts are. Say, for example, in terms of the economic relationship between the United States and Mexico. I think not enough Americans understand what an important trading partner Mexico is for the United States, and how NAFTA has actually worked to the benefit of both countries.
You just told me that when things go bad, people start looking for scapegoats, but since the economic data in the U.S. looks pretty good, why do you think millions of Americans have decided that Mexico is a threat to the U.S.?
Well, because I think millions of Americans, although the economic data may look good from a 30,000-foot level, they're not experiencing a rebound in their own economic fortunes, that their wages haven't increased, and their sons and daughters are having difficulty finding full-time jobs. And so in those circumstances, it's easy to look for someone to blame, rightly or wrongly.
How many undocumented students are enrolled at the university? Do you have those figures?
We estimate around 37 or 3,800 undocumented students.
You have Italian, German, and Austrian ancestry. What does that background mean in these days of mounting xenophobia and protectionism?
Well, like many Americans, I have a rich immigrant history in my background. My father's father was an immigrant from Italy, and he came with virtually nothing and was able to give my father his education, and my father gave me my education. That's the American dream. That's why people come.
President Obama has been hailed for the DACA program, and yet he has also been called the deporter-in-chief. How do you reconcile those two facts?
Well, I think you have to look underneath the deportation numbers and see who he was deporting. He was focused on those with serious felony convictions, and also those who were apprehended right at the border before they had established roots in American communities and raised their families there. And with respect to DACA, that's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. I crafted DACA when I was the Secretary of Homeland Security, and that was out of an understanding that the so-called dreamers, those children brought to the United States, and sometimes at a very young age, who were raised there, shouldn't be caught in the middle of our immigration battles and should be able to stay safely in the country and have authorization to work. And DACA has worked beautifully. 750,000 young people are in DACA now, around 600,000 of Mexican ancestry.
Several Dreamer youngsters have been detained and threatened with deportation. How far do you think the administration will go in terms of trying to deport them?
You know, hopefully those are exceptions because the president has so far indicated no desire to eliminate DACA. And instead, he has spoken sympathetically about these young people. So I'm hopeful that he will leave DACA alone. It's good law, it's good immigration policy.
I understand you wrote to the president speaking about the DACA students.
I did. I wrote to the president shortly after the election, urging him to keep DACA, knowing that we have thousands of DACA students as members of the University of California community.
There are about 500,000 pending cases in immigration courts in the U.S. What should be done about that?
Well, that's the rub. People think that you can just flip a switch and deport people, but there's a whole process that needs to take place. And if the U.S. is truly going to be deporting more people, more resources will need to be put into the immigration courts themselves.
And now in terms, since it was also a campaign promise, how far do you think this administration will go in terms of renegotiating, reviewing NAFTA?
Well, it's interesting to note that Donald Trump indicated he was retrenching from his campaign promise to throw NAFTA out the window, and instead is directing his administration to go segment by segment through the economy to determine where the trade deficits are and where renegotiation really needs to take place. So I think we are far away from knowing where President Trump is on NAFTA.
Politically and legally, how big of an issue is the supposed Russian spying during the election?
I think it's a big issue. I think that particularly the Senate Intelligence Committee will be following the intelligence where it leads, and I think that from what we've already seen, Russia intended to intervene in the American election and to create the context that helped allow Donald Trump to win.
What do you think of the mounting tensions between the U.S. and China?
Again, I think it unfortunate. I think the world obviously is a better place when countries are working together and realizing that things like trade can benefit both countries. United States is the world's #1 superpower. China would love to fill that role and would love to fill the vacuum left by United States' retreat into itself. So I think that the United States needs to re-engage with the world at a global level, recognizing that it's to the United States' advantage to do so.
How important is for the U.S. Talking to Mexico and Canada to forge security in North America?
It is important, and one of the things that gets lost in the current conflict between the United States and Mexico is how important that security partnership is. It's a partnership that involves exchange of information, of intelligence. It involves joint operations, and it involves great coordination with Mexico. And that's a partnership that has been increasing over the last years. It increased greatly during the Obama administration. It would be a great step backwards to lose that.
Could you describe the cooperation when you were the head of Homeland Security with Mexico in terms of binational security talks?
Yes. When I was Secretary of Homeland Security, I met often with my counterparts in Mexico. We did a number of joint operations. We exchanged intelligence. We really looked on each other as full partners.
What can be done to reduce the threat of drug trafficking in a bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Mexico?
Well, I think it requires several things. Obviously, it requires great law enforcement deployment to really go after the cartels. But it also means demand reduction in the United States. And, we need to do more to support demand reduction in the United States. And so it's a supply issue and it's a demand issue.
While you were in the Obama administration, do you think Mexico and the U.S. reached an optimal cooperation level?
We had great cooperation. Of course, you can always do more, but I always look to Mexico as a friend and as a partner.
Mexico has complained many times about guns going south. What can be done about that?
Obviously, detecting those guns going south through the ports of entry and doing more by way of southbound inspections, doing greater law enforcement intelligence gathering about who may be trying to bring guns into Mexico. All of those things should be on the table.
Was there any failures in the Fast and Furious operation?
I think, without going into the details, I think you would have to conclude, yeah, that there were some failures in Fast and Furious.
And finally, give me your take on the election. What happened to Hillary Clinton? Is it that she didn't campaign hard enough in some states, as President Obama once suggested, or was it the issue of Russian spying? What is your take?
I think a number of things happened in the U.S. election. Part of it was that it was a change election, an election about change, and Hillary didn't represent change. Part of it was the frustration with her perceived lack of an economic message compared with the simplicity of Trump's message, you know, make America great again. Perhaps part of it was the different way of media coverage of the campaigns in the modern era, and President Trump's mastery of that.
You were in politics for 20 years. Now you're in a different position. How do you feel, and what are the differences?
You know, now I'm privileged to lead one of the world's great universities, and we have a great mission, which is education of the next generation. So I can't think of anything more public-minded than doing that. And I may be out of a day in, day out of politics, but there's plenty of politics involved in my job too.
Madam President, thank you very much.
Thank you.